Let's see in the room, how many large-scale managers do we have? Okay, and how many CEOs? And how many portfolio? And how many other attorneys, CPAs? That's interesting, okay. We are certainly hopeful that when we take you through the concept of developing the corporate code of ethics, that you think through the need in your organization, regardless of the type of organization you're with. As Deb pointed out, we saw that the CEOs were focusing more on what their employees needed and large scale on the volunteer side, but in reality, any of us touching volunteers needs to have some code in place as well as for all of our employees. So this is going to generally give you a sense of how you would go about developing that code in the event that you don't have one. So you're going to want to define the values, and we're going to talk a little bit further about that. Then drafting your code of ethics, who's involved, what's your process there, and then review and adopting your code of ethics, who's involved in that process, what does that mean? And then finally, we're going to touch on communication and training, because as Deb alluded to, we don't want it to be too little too late. So from defining your values, you might have some regulatory requirements in Nevada. There are requirements that any board member or manager must disclose anything they receive from a vendor over $15. It's quite a bit of detail in that code. Then you might have some external factors affecting what the requirements are for your organization, and then internal factors. What are your corporate values? So some typical corporate values are, it's a small organization and we want to create a sense of family within the organization. We want to instill loyalty to the organization. We want to make sure that we have innovative people in place, and the culture of the organization isn't just stay as it is when people walk in the door. And then a philosophy on customer service. What would you say are some other typical values corporations or companies have? Integrity, great. Okay. Other ideas? Okay. So drafting the code of ethics, what you want to do so that there's buy-in at all levels is make sure that you've got representatives from the different levels of your organization. So some support staff, some senior management, the CEO certainly, or the general manager, whatever the case might be. And then if it's the board that you're developing this for, certainly get them to participate in it. While we can hand boards and volunteers certain documents that we ask them to sign off and agree to, if they haven't been part of the process, it's not as meaningful. And so while it will take us longer to make them have to think through or work with them just as with our employees, we're going to get more buy-in and more understanding of what it is that they're obligated to do. Identify the source document. You may have bylaws, your personnel policies. So when we're talking about a code of ethics, we're actually taking it from what might be a simple paragraph in your personnel manual and making it a pretty significant policy within those personnel policies that you have. So it really has a strong basis of your employees remembering that they need to follow those ethics at all times. And then you want to review it with your staff and your board, as I previously mentioned. And then ultimately, before you formally adopt it, you want to make sure that you have your attorney review it so that you're not violating any regulatory requirements, local laws, or any personnel laws as you ask everyone to adopt this policy and move forward with it. So in the best practices report, we will actually provide some samples of some codes of conduct for you. CAI currently has one that is a model code of conduct for board members. In review and adopting it, what's the process you want to go through to do it? And I touched on that briefly a minute ago. You want to make sure that every level is involved. And so you've got your document, you're ready to go. So have some meeting. Don't make it a minor event in the organization when you adopt it, but sit down and go through it and have, whether it's board members or your staff, talk through what does this mean, what are some examples you might have of it, because as we mentioned earlier, Sandy mentioned, there's sometimes a really fine line between what is misconduct, not that we want to ignore those issues, but what's an ethical issue and what's a misconduct or simply a stupid mistake. And then your customer review, if you're a CEO or another business where you're working with external groups, think about what that means and how do you communicate and let them know that this is a critical part of what the organization supports. And then for your community, again, certainly walking through it with the board of directors, but how do you tell the residents, how do you tell your contractors, and make sure that everyone is clear, from a resident in the community all the way up to the general manager and board members, that we're not going to support unethical behavior. Communication and training, what we found is there's initial communication either with your employee manual or with your code of conduct with your board of directors, but there's no ongoing communication and training. And so what we would encourage you to do as you adopt your code of ethics is to plan some regular schedules for communicating and training. Early on, once you get your code of ethics in place, you want to make sure that you've updated any documents that it might go into, such as your handbook, and then if you have staff meetings with your employees, touch on certain ethical topics periodically, but initially have that one meeting that's very dedicated and important to bring in the message that this is an important thing we want you to keep in mind. And then your board members' annual orientations, as we do those, that's a very simple opportunity, easy opportunity to bring this in, but also come back and touch on it periodically with your board members. Give them some examples. As an example, before you're getting ready to do a major contract review or go out to bid, in the example Sandy gave, anyone had lunch with so-and-so lately? But kind of bring them back and make them, give them examples of very tangible situations where ethics could be challenged.